Dear Dad, I love you. You be the, and we'll give her the benefit of the doubt here, nicest dad ever. I love you more than the whole world. So I sometimes include this in my lecture because at some point I realized that so much of my work has to do with observing something really small because it relates to something really, really large. And so loving something more than the whole world doesn't quite make sense. It's like people from Texas thinking that Texas is bigger than the United States or something.
And to introduce our speaker for today, Byron Kim, and also to celebrate his painting that's been here for ever since 2005. His work, Emmett at 10 years, which is, Emmett is his son. So it's an interesting portrait of his son, which will be talked about in the lecture. Byron, he's actually not from the East Coast. He's born in the West Coast in La Jolla, California, but now lives in Brooklyn in New York. He's a senior critic at Yale School of Art, and he received his bachelor's in English from Yale College, and then he attended the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture. He's often works in an area known as the abstract sublime. His work sits on the threshold between abstraction and representation, between conceptualism and also pure painting. His paintings often appear to be pure abstractions, but upon closer investigation, they reveal a very charged space that connects his personal experiences in relation to larger cultural forces. He's best known for his famous painting, Synecdoche, which was part of the Watershed 1993 Whitney Biennial.
Thank you so much. Thanks to Vivian Lee for inviting me and the museum. And it's my honor to be invited here. I'm glad that I was really happy that I could do it. It's my first time here. I wasn't able to come even when the work was initially installed. And I still haven't seen it here, so maybe after the lecture. This lecture is sort of geared around that work, so it's sort of focused on portraiture, but in a very expanded sense. So starting off with this very small painting, quite a bit smaller than the one that's in the museum. It has a story that goes with it, as do many of my paintings. And the story goes like this. When I was in kindergarten or first grade, my teacher, Miss Mashinsky, said, "Byron, that's a nice shirt." And I remember that shirt as being a turtleneck shirt that had very narrow stripes, and I remember the green color very precisely, but I couldn't remember whether the dark stripes were navy or black. So there are two versions of this painting. It's about the size of a kindergartner's torso. Anyway, the day after Ms. Mashinsky said that, I told my mom when she was dressing me in the morning, I said, "Mom, do you know that shirt I was wearing yesterday?" She says, yes. I have to wear that shirt again today. And my mom tells me that I insisted on wearing that shirt for 3 weeks. So this painting is called Miss Mashinsky, First Big Crush. This is also, it's sort of a double portrait. We have 3 kids. The third kid wasn't born yet when I made this portrait. It looks it's one of the very few realist paintings I've made. I mean, you can consider it a realist painting, I suppose, because some people think it's something celestial, like fireworks, or a depiction of a galaxy or something like that. But in fact, what it's meant to depict is the cowlicks on the back of our first two kids' heads. So the one on the right is Emmett's, and the one on the right left is Ella's. And Emmett is the subject matter of the painting here. This is to indicate more the scale, because they were made 1-to-1 scale, and they're made with egg tempera on traditional gesso on linen, which is backed by wood panel. By the way, feel free to ask questions during the course of my talk. It'll be a brief talk, and I'll pause at the end for questions, but if you shout one out in the middle, that's perfectly acceptable. So that last painting was part of a series that I made that was one or two paintings from each place that I'd lived in my life up to that point. And I just realized that since the time of that series, which was a long time ago, the number of places hasn't changed, because I've been in Brooklyn for 30 years. So that last painting was sort of the Brooklyn, New York painting, because all the kids were born in Brooklyn. But this is also a painting related to childhood. It's not really a portrait, unless we think of it as a portrait of Wordsworth. Anyway, I was an English major, as Vivian mentioned, and when I was trying to think of what my New Haven/Yale painting would be, I could only think of kind of parodies of my work, like the Blue of the Chaucer book that we all read as English majors. But eventually I ended up making this mural on the wall that's just made from house paint, and it's sort of an illustration of Wordsworth's kind of moment of epiphany in the poem I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud. And it faced it was in the show, it was directly across that from this tiny little work. And there were only 4 paintings in the show. So this is a really kind of extended version of a portrait, or anyway, the study for one. And this is the Wallingford, Connecticut painting. So after I was born in La Jolla, we moved to Hartford, and then we moved to Wallingford eventually. And so the Wallingford painting, we lived in a house that was pink, which is really unusual, but we didn't build the house, so it was already pink. And what I did was, in trying to remember what color the house was, I made these color charts and sent them to the 3 other members of my family, and they sent them back with this. This is the one that my sister sent back, and I also had my parents do it, but I just have this one, an image of this one. So this is all the notation that my sister, she was very thorough. She did it sort of by process of elimination, crossing out the ones that it absolutely could not be, and sort of chiding me for even thinking those colors could be considered pink or anywhere near related to the color of that house. And she even remembered the address where we lived, and this must have been 20 years later, and so at least 20 years later. And she almost remembers the phone number, but she couldn't quite. Anyway, it's lucky that she remembered the address because that became the title of the painting. So the painting is made by choosing 7 of those colors that my family chose, and taking a 4x8 piece of construction grade plywood and just leaning it against the wall, and then using a roller to paint those 7 colors, and then repeating them to make a 14 stripe painting on just a sheet of plywood that leans against the wall.
Have you gone back to the house to see if it's still the same color?
It's not, it's green. I went back there during college. Well, I don't know what color it is now. I went back during college, which is 35 plus years ago. So who knows what color it is now. It's crazy to think that the time that I revisited it was already almost 20 years from, well, no, it was only 10 or 15 years from when we left. But then now it's 35 years from when I revisited it. So I have no idea even if it's still there, the house. But I'm going to my 35th reunion. I went to Choate the other day, and I was with a kid who had been accepted there and his family, and I saw the sign for my elementary school, but we didn't have time. They needed to drop me off at the train station, so we weren't able to go there, and certainly not to that house. It would have been really interesting. Missed opportunity. So this is called, I'm not going to remember the title, but it's also the street address of the place we lived when I was born in La Jolla. It had 3 windows. I was never very interested in where exactly I lived, and then I suddenly got this idea that maybe I wanted to make a painting about it. And so then I asked my dad, who had always kind of pointed it out in passing, was happy that I was interested, and we took a walk by the beach there, and he pointed it out. He was working at as a physician at the medical clinic nearby, and it was just a 1-room apartment, and it had 3 windows that were that size and that far apart. So this is sort of what the view out those windows might look like. But I wanted to have access to that room, and it was no longer an apartment building. I knocked on the door that day that my dad brought me back there, and a woman answered the door, and it was apparently the corporate headquarters of a small hotel concern. And I asked if I could go up in that room up there, and she said no. And then I was just about to leave, and she said, but that was the boss's office now. So he's about to leave for his lunch break, so if you come back in half an hour, you can go in there and do whatever you want. So I went in there, and I just needed to look out the window and measure the windows and the distance between them. And then later, this is kind of the dorky way that I work. For a time, I had some of these panels on an easel on the sidewalk in front of that building, just to get a feel for what the seascape was like. This is a 1984 Dodge Aries station wagon, which was given to me by my father. It was his car when my second car, which was a really cool Volkswagen bus, was totaled. I inherited this, and I hate to admit this, but I was very disappointed to have this car at first, even though it was such a nice gesture. But strangely enough, this is the car that I became most attached to, probably my whole life of cars, which ended like 15 years ago when I realized it was ridiculous to have a car in Brooklyn. Anyway, I decided to make a painting of it that was sort of in the style of Bryce Martin, who's a painter whose work I really admire, especially his early work. So this is made in hot medium encaustic, which is with beeswax and oil paint. And I believe the left and center panels are the interior vinyl colors, and the right color is the exterior paint color. This is a portrait of a building or of a community of sorts. It's two colors from a building at the corner of Metropolitan and Bedford Avenues in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. It's a place where there's a public pool house, and it's quite an old place, and it was it still is, a place where lots of people in the community come to swim. That's a picture of the building. So this is very much the first slide I showed you is very much related to the work in the museum's collection, and so is this. This one's called Emmett at 12 months. So it's a portrait of my son's colors, not limited to skin color, obviously, on his body when he was 12 months old. So this was sort of like precedes the age where you have to get permission for everything, and he was like too young to grant permission anyway. So I looked at every single part of his body practically, and made these little egg tempera paintings that are about the size of his hand at the time. So they're quite small. They're like 2.5 inches high. And this is a picture of him about that time with both of his feet in one sneaker. That was in Williamsburg. And here's the work that's here. I don't know the dimensions, but it's Emmett at 10 years, so it was exactly his height when he was age 10. And it's this strange painting that it's made by hand, but it refers to digital imagery, because I took a picture of him, and then I chose a horizontal, a spot along, how do I say this? I took a vertical axis and then chose different colors along that line, and then just extended them left and right as a kind of just a color bar, and made it the width of the widest part of his body. And I was just told a very interesting fact by Jim, the former, I don't know Jim's last, Jim Willow, the former director of this museum. I was told an interesting fact that kids apparently, when they see this painting, they understand how it was made immediately, but that people, our age or older, don't get it immediately.
He's wearing white socks.
He is. He's wearing white socks. He's wearing partly white socks, I think. I think they're partly white, and they have a green and yellow part also. And then below that are the shoe colors. So his shorts are like dark gray with 2 white stripes, apparently. And he was wearing a Brazilian team soccer shirt, which he was very enamored of at that moment. So this is probably the best known portrait that I've made, and it's a group portrait of sorts. It's very simple. They're 10 by 8 inch oil paintings of people's skin color made from observation, usually looking at someone's arm. And then they're arranged alphabetically by first name of the subject. So instead of having a dozen Rodriguez's in a row, you have 7 or 8 Lisas in a row. And so that work is called Synecdoche, and it's always the title, technically the title is Synecdoche : then a list of names in the same order as they are installed. So it's been collected by the National Gallery in Washington, and the great perk of that is that people are constantly sending me pictures of themselves in front of it. And so that's Emmett at maybe 20, I don't know, 21, or he's 25 now, but this was a few years ago. So,
Does anybody blend in?
sorry?
Does anybody stand against it and blend in?
Well, they're too small for someone to blend in completely, unless they have some sort of disease. But yeah, I think that you can probably find your color somewhere there, no matter who you are. Victoria Fu, who's a video artist, and her parents. Lucas, Suzanne McClellan's son, Lucas Vogelman.
Excuse me, what was your process for finding all the variety of people for that?
There was actually no process that related to that, because originally it's a funny story. I made maybe about a dozen of them, and they were just of my immediate friends. So that was that process. And so that wasn't really trying to make a diverse palette of colors. It was just my friends' skin colors, which were probably fairly diverse. But I wasn't really thinking about that so much. I was thinking about taking the modernist grid and infusing it with some other content, just like that stripe painting that I showed in the beginning. But then this curator, this friend of mine, Paul Bloodgood, or just a guy that I was working with at the time, moving artwork in a truck, who was an artist also and became a really influential curator. He came to my studio for the first time and saw those few works, and he said, "That's really interesting. What are those beige and brown panels?" And I explained that to him, and he said, "If you can make enough of those to fill the wall in the gallery," he had a small space in the office of the company we worked for. I know the perfect Kiki Smith piece to go along with it. I had no idea that he could even contact Kiki Smith. I hadn't really shown anywhere, and it happened. I made a couple hundred of them over the course of the next months, I guess, and he borrowed that work of Kiki's, and that's kind of where my professional career started. Anyway, here's a kind of a selfie of my college roommate Tom Parada in front of the work. He's a famous novelist now. So this is the third child, Adeline Kim, who also goes to Yale. She's a first-year student there now. But this is when she was probably about 14 or something. And this is, I guess we can call it an artwork of that she made when she was about the age that I was when I was wearing that when I was in Miss Mashinsky's class. And I guess it was some sort of assignment. Maybe it was Valentine's Day or something. Sometimes I've tried to explicate the meaning of the artwork, but I won't. I'll try not to do that this time. I'll just read the inscription, or I'll try to translate it for you. Dear Dad, I love you. You be the, and we'll give her the benefit of the doubt here, nicest dad ever. I love you more than the whole world. So I sometimes include this in my lecture because at some point I realized that so much of my work has to do with observing something really small because it relates to something really, really large. And so loving something more than the whole world doesn't quite make sense. It's like people from Texas thinking that Texas is bigger than the United States or something. But after including this in my slide lecture a number of times, I realized that I mistranslated it. It actually says, it's Dear Dad, I love you. Could you be the nicest dad ever? Which could be read in completely different with two opposing meanings. So Synecdoche was recently reinstalled at the National Gallery, and that's what it looks like now. It's a very cleaned up image. No floor. There are about 500 elements, I think, now. Oh, this is, I made a series of paintings of my mom's skin color, and she's still alive and well, and she's 90. This was probably when she was around 70, or maybe even a little younger. And usually when I paint a color, I do it by observing the color closely. But for my mom's skin color, I decided I wanted to do this series of paintings, of which this is the largest. I wanted to do it from my memory or my imagination because to me, this kind of painting comes from New York school painting, ultimately, I think. I feel like I'm the grandchild of both conceptual artists of the 70s and New York school artists, painters of the 50s. And those artists, for the most part, they made works whose subject matter I think was too big for words, such as life or chaos or the universe or tragedy or depression. And by and large, my subject matter had mostly been content, subjects that were almost too small for words, such as, minutely looking at someone's skin color or the color of a shirt or the color of a ceramic glaze or something like that. But I thought that the mother's skin was a subject that was the only subject that I had used that was akin to that kind of large subject matter, because to an infant, the mother's surface the surface of the mother's body is like the universe in a way. These are the Sunday paintings that Vivian referred to. Since January 7th, 2001, I've made a painting every week of the sky. So there are over 800 of them. They're 14 by 14 inches and they're in acrylic. And they have, each of them has an inscription written directly on the painting. And it's usually, it's kind of, it's often what's going on, you know, with my family, or what happened yesterday, or what the weather is like. So, for
I still have a question.
go ahead, just shout it out.
Okay. Going back to your famous painting, the one in the National Gallery, where did the title come from?
Oh, so Synecdoche is
Looking it up.
a work of Greek derivation that is, it's actually a term of grammar that is a kind of metaphor that means a part standing for the whole. So small and big. So for instance, an example of a synecdoche would be, let's say, in the Navy, when they say, when the ship's captain says, all hands on deck, the term hands, when he's using that word hands, he doesn't literally mean put your hand there. He means all sailors on deck. He means the whole person. So in that case, the hands are a synecdoche for the sailor. And that's why I chose that title. There are lots of reasons for that title. One of them is that Synecdoche, it has been exhibited numerous times in many places, and I don't insist that the whole piece be exhibited. So any part of it, to me, any part of it not only represents the whole, but it sort of is the whole. When I started making it, among those group of first, dozen or so friends whose skin colors I painted, is a friend named Tom Burkhart, who's also an artist. And when I was mixing his skin color, it probably took half hour or 40 minutes, and then I started to make the painting. And he said, and then I finished the painting right in front of him. And he said, "That's it? It's that easy? Why don't you make two?" I had no idea why I should make two. It made no sense to me. And I asked him why, and he said, someday, if you make a lot of these, you might want to sell one copy of it and keep the other. And so I don't know why I took him up on that, because I hadn't sold anything, and I wasn't thinking about an art career in that way, but I owe that guy dinner. Sorry. I was going to read one of these. It was such a relief to talk to Barbara today after so long. Life would be intolerable without such good old friends. Ella is working on her first science fair project at home with Lisa. Emmett and Addie are with me at the studio playing with a little blue ball. 3904, 1:30 p.m., Gowanus, Brooklyn. So my studio's in that section of Brooklyn. That one's from 2015. That one's from St. Petersburg, Russia. So they're 14 by 14 inch squares, because that's the largest square that will fit in a roller bag. This one mentions Donald Trump. So I try not to mention him too much in Sunday paintings. So this is a
You're
portrait.
still doing more of them?
Yeah, so I did one. I have one. I have three panels with me. I did one in my friend's driveway in Williamstown on Sunday. At 7 p.m., I barely got it in there under the bell. And I have two more. One will be done in Vermont, and the third one is either going to be done very early in the morning in New York or in the Bahamas, because we're going to visit our daughter in the Bahamas. She's teaching there on Sunday, a week from Sunday.
Question.
Mm-hmm.
Gene Davis had developed the technique of using masking tape for these very strong vertical lines. I'm wondering if you employ masking tape.
I did use masking tape for this painting. Yeah, so a lot, because I went back and forth. So this is a vertical stripe painting, 4 stripes. The 2 outer stripes seem to be very similar, and you might look at this painting and say, why is the one? If you saw it in person, you might say, why is that one stripe so much darker, and why does there seem to be kind of atmosphere in a modernist stripe painting? Anyway, it's probably my favorite painting that I've ever made. My favorite discrete painting, and it's a portrait of the UN building. It's not the view of the UN building the Secretariat building of the UN complex that you normally see from the East River in coffee table books, which shows that curtain wall broadly. It's the view that New Yorkers get as they're driving up and down the FDR. So in fact, I made 2 versions, one driving uptown from around 30th Street, which is this one, and the other one coming from downtown. I say driving, but I actually, again, of course, I went and made studies along the river there, along the East River.
Question, do you use photographs at all to make your studies in color?
Very rarely. I would never, is that true? I would never use a photograph to try to remember a color. I've used photographs for other reasons, but not very, I probably used a photograph for this painting, the painting that's here. I had to have. I don't remember exactly, to tell you the truth, but I must have used a photograph. But that would be a very rare occasion. So here's an example where I did use a photograph, but it was a bad photograph. It was a bad reproduction. These next few slides, along with that UN building painting, were all in a show that originally I thought would be all stripe paintings. Anyway, I'm not going to explain the rationale because it would just, it's too convoluted and too lengthy. But anyway, this is a 12-foot wide painting. It's about 32 inches high or something like that. And it's a detail of a very late Edward Hopper painting. But it's not from this reproduction, but from a really bad reproduction that I got just from a clipping in the New York Times. And this, so that painting of Hopper's is called something like Sunlight in an Empty Room, and it's from 1960 or so, 61, which happens to be right around when I was born. And then this is from a really bad reproduction from a book of Kirk Varnado's final lectures. And this is an illustration that photograph that I was working from. So your question was very timely because I claimed never to use photographs, and all of a sudden there are several paintings where I used photographs. But none of them were photographs that I took. This was an illustration in that book that was depicting a Robert Irwin disc painting. And it was terrible, and it didn't really say much or anything about the original work. And it's sort of explains why Irwin didn't let anyone photograph his works for so many years. But I endeavored to make a painting very loyal to the bad reproduction, but at the size of the original artwork. And the reason why I chose this subject and the last are that both artists are artists of light, and astonishingly, these works are virtually contemporaneous. In other words, this work and this work, I think the Irwin is a year or two later, from either 62 or 3 or something like that, which is just amazing to me. Irwin is an artist I really, really have appreciated over the years. Hopper is an artist who I first liked and then really disliked, and then now I'm coming around to appreciate his work again. This is a work which has a long story, but I'll try to say it really concisely. There's this story that Delacroix was painting a painting that had yellow drapery depicted in it, and he didn't understand what the color of the shadow should be, so he wanted to go to the Louvre to see how Rubens would have managed it. He must have had a certain painting in mind, so he went out his studio and hailed a cabriolet, which was the horse-drawn carriage, public carriage, and they were painted chrome yellow, which is a lead-based yellow. And and that's probably where we get our term cab. When the cabriolet pulled up, he noticed the shadow underneath the yellow cab, and that's all the information he needed. So he paid the cabman his fare and went back into his studio and finished the painting. So I wanted desperately to make a painting about that for this show, and of course I did it in my typical way. I went outside and looked at mostly parked New York City taxi cabs and noticed the shadow on the roadbed. But these studies which were mostly in watercolor and gouache, were terrible. They were so static. There was nothing interesting about them. And the main thing is that the shadow wasn't doing anything, even, I guess, especially when I was trying to make it as accurately as possible. So in desperation, I decided maybe it should be a real shadow. So as you can see, what I ended up making was a yellow bar of a painting that has it has a couple inches in depth, and then it's lit in a way that you don't have multiple shadows. You just have this one shadow. So that big gray area is literally painted on the wall, and then there's just a shadow of the yellow painting casting over half of the gray area. Oh, these are 12th century Korean ceramics, which are probably the cultural production that of which Koreans are most proud. And then, of course, I made color field paintings in relation to a number of examples of those kind of pots. This is a series of them at the Hirshhorn Museum, probably around 1995 or so. Whoops. This is one that was commissioned by the museum in Houston. Vivian, were you there when that happened? Yeah. So I think I'm going to end there. Yeah, that's a good place to end because the hour is almost up. I have others slides, but they would take way too long. So I'm happy to answer any questions or not. The question was, do I think of the light source illuminating my subject that I'm looking at, whatever it is? And I often don't, but sometimes I do. And I started to answer the question by saying that it gives me a lot of anxiety because I realized that I thought when I was making all those skin paintings that the light source, as long as it was strong, didn't matter that much because this was my rationale, that if the light was strong enough and it included enough, bandwidth of light, that it was relatively white light, that whatever color I came up with, if it matched closely, then it would match in another strong light situation, strong white light situation. But actually, I've had 20 years to think about this, and I think that that's wrong. So it makes me a little nervous, but in the end, I've rationalized that it's okay because the color mixing itself is so subjective that it's absurd to think that my version of the color is what 100% accurate, whatever that would mean. And so my human error, what am I trying to say? My human error is probably greater than that being so specific that I wanted it to be, sort of scientifically. So I used to carry around a tungsten bulb that would make it really precise, but that was always, there's always natural light around. I never did it at night. So although I did do it indoors, I just probably never did it in a really dark space. So the answer to your question is, I do think about it sometimes, and sometimes I just ignore it because it makes me nervous. Any other questions? Right. So the question is basically how I come up with an idea.
In a way, it's more like I'm thinking also about James Dye and the exhibition that's having its opening tonight, and how long it took him to get to what we see in the gallery now. And I'm wondering, other people might draw stripes as we hear people in the gallery say things like that. Oh, I could do that, purple and green stripes. But you did it in a purposeful way, and I'm wondering what brought you to that, to be able to say, this is what I want to do.
It's a very long answer, but I'll try to illustrate it and make it shorter. So the answer is basically, the question is basically how I come up with an idea, I think. But really, how do I come up with it? So one night I was walking around and I looked up at the sky in the city and I noticed it was this strange color, and I realized, you hardly ever see the stars in the sky, and if you see a star, it's probably a planet or a plane. And I realized the color was so beautiful. And I simultaneously realized it was due to light pollution. So I thought that was a good subject matter for my work. So I endeavored to making these large field paintings. And so for over a year, I made paintings, many layered paintings in acrylic, 8 by 6 feet, of just the field of that kind of color by studying the night sky and going back to my studio the next day and trying to remember it. So after a year of this, I went to the two people that I really count on to tell me whether something is working or not. And I really, really count on them. And if they say it's not working, it's not interesting, or you're not doing it the right way, then I just quit. So these paintings, I'd worked on them for more than a year, and these two people separately both said that they both didn't give the thumbs up or the thumbs down. They both basically said, independently of each other, we understand what you're doing, and they are beautiful if we get your explanation of them, but they're way too difficult for everyone else, we think. So that was depressing. I usually, at that point, I give up, even if I've been struggling with it that long. This time, I thought there was enough there to keep trying, and so a recent student of mine was in my studio, Maximiliano Ferro. I told him that he was looking at these paintings, and I told him the problem, and he's just one of these, unlike me, he's one of these people who's just always optimistic and just really, he's just like this. I explained the problem, and he said, oh, well, all you need to do is have a context for the color. So why don't you put a building in the painting or something like that? And I looked at him like, what, are you an idiot? But then I didn't say that. I just looked at him like that. And then I realized a second later that he was absolutely right. So then all of these paintings have little border stripes. This one has 2. This one has 3. They're always open at the top. This one also has 3. Sometimes they only have 1. This one has 2. This one has 1, and it's a little narrower, and it has that kind of halo that's very apparent. So that's one version of an answer to your question. But it always goes like that, especially with a big series of paintings. It often goes that way.
Yes, you had a mention of 14-inch paper for painting. Is that one basic pattern, or would you do a mural as opposed to one piece of paper? I might do a mural. I have done a mural. I was, in that case, I was just referring to these paintings that I make every week. Those are all 14 by 14 inch. They're on canvas, and that's stretched over a panel, and they're 14 by 14 inches, just so that they can fit in my carry-on bag. But other than that, it's not a special size to me, other than the fact that it fits in a luggage and that I've made 850 of them or something like that.
How do you hang them?
Usually on 2 nails. Last time we installed them, we've made them a little lower than standard height. I don't know. It's just so that people could read them. I was really astonished. The last time I had a show of these, there were a little under 100, and the previous time there were exactly 52, and both times I was astonished and somewhat embarrassed to see people actually reading one from the next all the way to the end, which it's a little bit embarrassing just personally, but it's just also so gratifying because I don't know that I've ever concretely proven to myself that my work could do this, but all I ever want to do is for someone to slow down for a few minutes and ponder something. And when I saw people just slowing down to that extent, it was really kind of a lot of mixed emotions. It was very interesting.
For these paintings as well, the Sunday ones, for the sky, did you is that expressive of a certain mood or tone, or is it like a study of actually what the sky looked like?
Yeah, I just I look at the sky and it takes 5 minutes or an hour, but it seldom takes more than that because it has to be really quick. It's acrylic. If it took longer than that, I wouldn't have gotten to this point of, being able to make them every week. I have this fantasy that when I'm older, it'll be, there'll be this period of time. I wonder whether this is true. There'll be this period of time when I'm only capable of making these paintings, and then I think, oh, if I'm lucky, I'll have I'll have all week to make them, and so I'll prepare them in oil, and I'll make an oil painting, and then I'll have all week for it to dry, and then, but that probably will never come to pass.
So you paint every single day of the week, you don't take a day off?
No, I take so many days off. I do paint every Sunday, though. I paint every Sunday. There have been, I'm just being honest with you, I mean, after September 11th, for instance, for some reason, I couldn't get any work done for a couple of years. And I actually managed to, then I realized, oh, I got 100 paintings done.
Yeah.
Despite not getting anything else done. So I'm not one of those people that, I think that the answer to the question of how I get an idea, maybe you can infer that I'm not that kind of person that can go to the studio and just like a job, just work every day. I show up most days.
I can understand.
Yeah.
I was your student. I was actually in your class on September 11th.
Yes.
Amanda Ryder.
Hi.
I'm here in Worcester.
Yeah. Do you remember? And were you one of the ones that stayed?
I stayed.
Yeah.
But I remember I saw one of your Sunday paintings from after that.
Yeah.
And then in the
Yeah.
museum
Oh, I'm
work
kind of
we-
almost tearing up. It's good to see you.
Well, this talk has been very emotional for me too. But one thing I wanted to ask you is, what you're doing so much is painting representations of color. You're trying your best for accuracy. But to what extent is, and maybe this is a hard question to answer, is that you kind of putting a color to your emotions or your feelings about something?
Right. That is such an amazing question. I've never had that asked of me. Although someone here almost asked the same question. You're just making me answer it. I think that I think that I am painting accurately what I see, but I think in the end that it's really just the other thing. I don't know how that works though, because I genuinely do look up at the sky every Sunday and try to figure out what color that patch of sky is or that cloud that's going by and the shadow underneath it. How are you? Do you remember that kid George in the class? He's the only person from that class that I occasionally run across.
Well, count me in on your.
Good to see you.
Maybe time for this.
Okay, one more question.
You said that you wanted to, with your art, get people to slow down for a minute.
Right. Okay. So the question is, I want to get people to slow down, but how do I respond to the fact of people saying that the work is difficult? Well, first of all, those particular people telling me that the work is difficult means a lot to me. Some other people telling me that, I don't care. So those two people's opinions are really important to me. Oh God, I forgot the question again. It's because Amanda's here, I think.
I have another question. What's your favorite color that you've ever painted before?
Cobalt violet. Violet is my favorite color. Cobalt violet light. But I want to answer that question. When I want people to slow down, and if they're saying it's difficult, that means that a small percentage of a percent are going to slow down. That's what they're saying, essentially. They're saying most people are going to look at this and just walk on by. Most people do that anyway with artwork, so I don't really want to make it easier for them to do that. So I could have just said to them, you're wrong, and stuck with those color field paintings with no context. Then I think, because I trust them, I think that I would have made paintings that people wouldn't have been able to understand very well. And so it's really important to listen to your audience, even if it's just that audience of a few people that come to your studio, those people that you trust. And then it's also really important to listen to your audience, the other people as well. I was just about to give an answer that totally contradicted that, but I would only give that answer if I were not being filmed.